Hi, and welcome to TheFIX, a podcast about Lightroom, Photoshop, post-processing, and the cool and creative things we get to do with our images after the shoot. I'm Seán Duggan, your host, and on this week's show, we're going to be taking a look at ways that you can apply local adjustments, aka dodging and burning, to your images in Lightroom. Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in and joining me. So the topic for this week's show is ripped straight from today's headlines, or actually, well, no, that's not the right way to say it. It is drawn from recent comments on TheFIX. A couple of weeks ago, as part of the Rocky Nook book giveaway, I encouraged people to leave a comment and request a topic that they wanted to see covered, or give me some suggestions, whatever. And some of you did. I do appreciate that. And one of those people has the very unique name of Dude Incredible. And Dude Incredible said, "Hey Seán, how about a burn and dodge tutorial?" So that is what I'm going to be talking about on this week's show. Before I get into the details of that, let me actually harken back to that topic of the Rocky Nook book giveaway, since I just mentioned it, because as this episode airs on Tuesday morning, April 19th, Pacific time, you still have several hours left to enter the Rocky Nook book giveaway. And in that book giveaway, you can win a book of your choosing from Rocky Nook. So if you go to rockynook.com, click on bookstore, you can check out a range, all the books that they have. They have quite a lot of really interesting titles and subjects that they cover. And then to get all the details of how to enter, go to the show page for episode 60, which is on Layer Mask Basics, aired a couple weeks ago. And that is where the instructions are and where you need to enter for that. So there's still a few hours left, or several hours, depending on what time you watch this. The entries close at midnight, April 19th. And that's midnight Pacific Standard Time, California time. So if you haven't yet entered, go ahead. Somebody's got to win, and there's not a lot of entries so far. So the odds are actually pretty good right now. All right, so back to the topic of dodging and burning, as suggested by Dude Incredible. Great topic. Thank you for that suggestion. The first thing that comes to my mind is, well, would that be dodging and burning in Photoshop, or dodging and burning in Lightroom, or perhaps both? I'm going to actually be starting with talking about Lightroom, mainly because in my own workflow, I try to apply as many adjustments and enhancements and improvements as I can in Lightroom before I bring the image into Photoshop. And that's just mainly because that's where I start my image processing, and the tools in Lightroom are really good for that. And it just makes the most sense to try to do as much to the image there, especially when the image is still in its raw state. And I do shoot raw most of the time in my personal and professional work. So that's what we're going to be doing for this week's tutorial. But on a future show, I will delve into the topic of dodging and burning in Photoshop, so we can discuss how to apply it in that program. And in terms of the image we're going to be working on in Lightroom, we're going to be working on an image that features this lens. This is kind of this really cool old lens. It's a lens from an old spotlight, a theatrical spotlight that I've had forever. I mean, since I was a little kid, I had this. I think my father brought it home one time. He used to be a projectionist and would also sometimes have work as a spotlight operator for, stage shows, circuses, whatever. And he brought this home, this chipped one here, and I have always loved it. And it has featured in several of my photographs. Plus, it's just, just kind of a cool thing to have hanging around. And I can do this with it, which is big fun, obviously. All right, so let's dive into Lightroom and take a look at the local adjustments in Lightroom, aka dodging and burning in Lightroom. So here is that image featuring the spotlight lens, and this is a process version that I've already worked on, but I wanted to show you what the finished version looks like. If I tap the letter Y on the keyboard here in the Develop module in Lightroom, it will show me the before and after view. And let me just tap the Tab key as well to hide my side panels so that we can see larger versions of the image. So you can see it has had quite a bit of transformation applied to it in Lightroom, but nothing has been added. All of the information was there captured in the exposure. It just needed a little bit of coaxing to bring it out. And local adjustments, or the Lightroom equivalent of dodging and burning, were a big part of that. So the interesting thing here is that, I have this photograph of this old chipped spotlight lens. And of course, a lens allows us to focus light to create an image, and we can, focus on a certain part of the scene to create our image. And local adjustments also allow us to focus our image after the fact by focusing on certain parts of the scene and helping to guide the viewer's eye. So local adjustments are very, very important in the processing of any photograph, whether you do that in Lightroom or in Photoshop. For this example here, I'm going to be sticking to Lightroom, and I actually have a snapshot that I created of the original picture with a slight crop applied. So let's just start there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and kind of process the whole thing. So in addition to learning some of the local adjustments in Lightroom, you will also be learning kind of some general Lightroom processing. So I'm going to start here over in the basic panel in the Develop module. And the first thing I want to do is just sort of take a look and see how much detail I might have left in the sky, because the sky is pretty bright here. But if you look at the histogram, you can see that the histogram data here on the right side of the histogram is not hitting the edge, so it's not clipped. And also the clipping warning, which is this little triangle up here above the right side of the histogram, that is not currently lit up. So I don't have any clipping there, so that is a good thing, which means I do have detail there. And sometimes just to see how much detail I have, I'll just really darken it down a lot to see what's there. And so you can see that I do have, quite a lot of good tonal variation in the clouds, and nothing is really blown out. So I'm just going to double click on the exposure slider here to reset it. By the way, that's a very useful Lightroom trick if you didn't already know it. A good one to know. A variation on that shortcut, by the way, is if you have several sliders that have been set. So for instance, let me just do a bunch of things with these sliders here. Let me just make several adjustments. So I've got all of these sliders, or most of these sliders, tweaked a little bit. So you can see there's a lot going on here. Well, each of these sections in the basic panel has a name. So for instance, the exposure, contrast, highlight, shadows, etc. That's the tone section. Well, if I just double click on the word tone, it resets all of the sliders in that section. Same thing down here for presence, clarity, vibrance, and saturation. If I double click on the word presence, it's going to reset all of those sliders. And by the way, that same shortcut is going to work anywhere in Lightroom. Down here in the tone curve, I can just click on the word region here, and it will reset all of those sliders. Or of course, you can just double click on an individual slider and it will reset just that one slider. So brief little detour there, just because I thought that was a useful shortcut to pass on to you. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do here is I am going to bring down the exposure a little bit. I'm really going to be reclaiming the detail in the sky in another way, separate from the exposure slider. So I'm not going to worry about trying to get it all in this adjustment. I do want to brighten up the shadows a bit, and I will raise the shadow slider. And then the other thing I want to do is set my black and my white point. So the blacks are a little bit wimpy now. I'm going to take the black slider and move it down to darken down the blacks. Now I can see by looking at the histogram, when I get to a certain point here, that clipping warning turns on. Now, if I hover over that or just click on it to turn it on, it shows me in blue the areas of the image that I am losing detail in. And that's mainly, you know, in the shadow areas of the tree or down underneath the rock. So that's not really too critical, but I really don't want to clip it that much. I just want to make sure I have a nice, good black there in the image. And that looks pretty good. And I can, of course, do the same thing with the whites. I can raise the white slider up to increase the white value. But in this case, I'm going to leave that the way it was because I really don't want the sky getting any brighter than it is. I'm going to bring the highlight slider down a little bit and then maybe even bring my exposure back a little bit. There we go. So that's fairly decent. It's still looking pretty blah. I'm going to add a little clarity in there, and that right off the bat is going to help a lot. Clarity is a contrast adjustment that is adjusting contrast on the midtones. Wherever there's a contrast difference between one tone or another, a bright tone next to a darker tone, and it really is working more on the middle range of tones in the image and less so on the extreme ends, the blacks and the whites. So clarity definitely does quite a bit there, so I like that a lot. And I am going to increase the vibrance a bit just to enhance the saturation of the greens. There we go. So that looks pretty good. Now I really need to kind of go in and do some more localized adjustments. I've pretty much done all that I can with the overall adjustments. I do need to go in and make some local adjustments. So let me just close the basic panel. And my local adjustments that I can apply to specific areas of the image are found up here in this little toolbar underneath the histogram. And I have of course, the spotting tool or the healing tool. That, of course, is a local adjustment for retouching, but we're not going to really cover that here. This next one is the red eye tool. Obviously, I don't have any red eye here, so we're not going to talk about that. But we are going to spend some time on these last three: the gradient filter, the radial filter, and the adjustment brush. I'm going to start with the gradient filter because I want to apply two separate adjustments to the image here, to the sky, and then also to the darker land and foreground parts of the image. And if you look at this, you can see that this image really is almost divided diagonally from the lower right corner up to the upper left corner. So that top part of that diagonal is mostly the sky, and the bottom part is mostly the mountain and the foreground elements. So the gradient tool really makes a lot of sense here. So I'm going to double click on the word effect here in the gradient control panel, and that will reset all of my sliders. Right now I only have the shadow slider adjusted from my previous outings with this tool. So I'll just double click on the word effect, and that's going to reset all of those sliders. Often a good thing to do before you use this tool. And I'm going to bring the exposure down a bit, maybe down about, roughly one stop here. Now nothing is happening right now because I have not actually applied the gradient filter yet. So don't get confused if you're doing this and you may adjust these sliders and you don't see anything happening. I'm essentially just preparing the soil, as it were, so that when I do apply the adjustment, it will have the effect that I want. So that's what I'm going to start with. And I'm going to place my cursor roughly above this mountain here in the center, and I'm going to drag down diagonally. I'm going to drag out a fair distance here. So the way that this tool works is the shorter your drag, the more obvious the transition is between the adjusted area and the non-adjusted area. So you can see it's pretty obvious there, the dark part and then the light part, and you see this really obvious blend. But the longer your drag, the more space or distance in the image the effect is faded out to. And when you're using this tool, you always want to drag in the direction that you fade it out to. So where I started my drag is up here, right where this kind of top line is, and where I ended my drag was down here where this bottom line was. So where you start your drag is going to be 100% of the effect, and where you end it is going to be 0% of the effect. And the distance of how far you drag out that gradient tool represents the area where the effect is fading out to 0. And of course, the middle line is going to be 50%. Now I want to adjust the angle of my gradient. So to do that, I'm going to position my cursor over the middle line. And here's a little tip. If you do this using the outer parts of the line, you're going to have a lot more control than if you do it right near the center. Because if you do it right near the center, it's just harder to control. But if you do it on the outer part of the gradient, it's just a lot easier to control the rotation. I'll grab that center point and then just drag that up. So right off the bat, that is looking so much better for the sky. Maybe I'll also bring the highlights down as well, and maybe bring the exposure back up a bit. And bringing the highlights down helps with this bright area here in the clouds above the lens. So overall, I really like that. I think that's working quite well. However, the one thing I don't like is the fact that the lens, the top part of the lens, of course, is also being affected by this adjustment. And you can see that if I turn this on and off here using the little on-off switch for that gradual filter. But there's a way I can modify that using an adjustment tool within the gradual filter. So up here at the top of the controls for the gradient or the gradual filter, there is an option to use a brush. So I'll click on that. And what I want to do is I want to erase this area. So I can either come over here to the control panel for the gradient filter, and I can click on the word erase, or I can also just hold down the Option key on a Mac or the Alt key on Windows, and that puts it into erase mode. So that's a similar shortcut that you might use with some of the selection tools in Photoshop. If you want to subtract from a selection, you would hold down the Option key on Mac or the Alt key on Windows. So notice now I have a subtract brush, and as long as I have that Option or Alt key down, I can now paint over the area where I want to subtract the effect that was created by that gradual filter. And so that is working pretty well. And now the top part of that lens is not getting as dark. Now, if I press the O key on the keyboard, it will show me the overlay. The red areas of the overlay are the areas of the image that are being affected by the gradual filter. Now I'm going to hold down the Option key again, and I'm noticing a little bit of kind of roughness here along the top part of the lens. That's because I had the Automask option turned on, so I'll turn that off, and I'll tap the left bracket key several times to make my brush smaller, and then I can come and paint over that area there and touch that up. So sometimes painting with the overlay turned on so you can see areas that you missed is very useful. So the shortcut again to turn the overlay on is to tap the letter O on the keyboard. You can also come down here underneath the main preview image. There is a checkbox for that, Show Selected Mask Overlay. So that's working pretty good. I'm noticing a little bit of a kind of a halo or a fringe right there. So I think I'm just going to come back over there with a regular brush and kind of paint that in there so that that's not showing up as so much of a little halo there. There we go. That looks better. And again, maybe I'll come back up here and just feather in a little bit more. All right, so there is our first local adjustment, darkening down the sky. And that's working really good. Let's throw another gradient adjustment on here to affect the darker parts of the image. So I'll come over here and I'll click New. And I'm going to, for this one, I'm going to increase the shadow slider and brighten that up a little bit. So I will just drag upward now. And before I dragged downward, now I'm going to drag upward. Remember, where you start your drag for the gradient tool or the gradual filter in Lightroom, that is where the effect will be applied at 100%, and then it will fade out in the direction you drag towards. So I'll start here kind of in the middle of the mountain and drag up this way and just kind of get my angle looking good. Maybe stretch out the size of the gradient so it's fairly subtle. And right off the bat, that actually looks really nice. If I double click on the shadow slider to turn it off, you can see it does a good job kind of punching in a nice little bit of luminance into those darker areas. I'm also going to turn the clarity up because I think that I want to sort of pop that texture a little bit, you know, just that sort of variation of light and shadow showing up in the back there. All right, overall, I really like that. Let me just turn the preview on and off for those 2 gradient adjustments, and you can see that that's really doing a good job there at improving the image. Excellent. All right, so onward, I'm going to close my gradual filter. And next what I want to do is I want to come and work with the radial filter. So let's go to the radial filter here. This has the same type of controls. You can adjust all of these things using these local adjustment tools. I'm going to just double click on the shadow slider to reset it. And I'll take a sip of coffee here because we've reached that time in the tutorial when a sip of coffee would be good. What I want to do now is focus the viewer's attention a little bit more on that lens, that kind of strange, mysterious lens perched there on the rock. So I'm going to lower the exposure value down, which is going to darken. And I'm going to place my cursor roughly in the center of the shape of this lens, and I'm going to drag outward. Now, the way that the radial filter works is that by default, it will apply the effect to anything that is outside the shape that you create. So here I have, you know, this roughly circular shape, and you can see that the area outside the shape is being affected by this adjustment. It's getting darker, okay? Now, the other thing that you can do is modify the feather of this shape. So you can see down here, I've turned the feather down and the shape is very hard. I can now turn the feather up and add in some feathering there. So this is actually a little bit too dark here. I'm going to turn that back up a little bit, but I did want to just kind of bring down the value a little bit of what was going on in the background there. I may modify it again somewhat, but overall I kind of like what's going on there. All right, so now what I want to do is I want to add another adjustment that is only applying to the shape of the lens. Now, of course, I could drag out another radial shape, but I already have a radial shape here that's working pretty good, although I think I am going to maybe grab these little square handles and make it in a little bit tighter to the this shape there, and maybe rotate it just a little bit there. There we go. So instead of dragging out a new shape, I'm going to copy the one that I have. So I'm going to hold down Command and Option on Mac or Control Alt on Windows and click and drag on this center dot, which will make me a copy. So now you see I have 2 there. So the one that's positioned slightly to the right is the new one, the copy. Now I'm getting a kind of a double dose of that darkening adjustment. So what I'm going to do is I am going to lighten this by bringing up the brightness. Of course, it is affecting the background because that is the default behavior of this tool. But if I come down here to the bottom part of the control panel for the radial filter and click on Invert Mask, it now inverts the mask, and now it's the center of that circle that's being affected. So now you can see I can kind of turn up the brightness inside that lens and make it look almost like it is being illuminated from within, or you know, I'm seeing some other view through that lens. So that is actually working out very well. One thing I'm noticing, however, that I don't necessarily like is I don't want that rock to be getting too bright. So once again, that is probably a good job for the brush feature that is within the radial filter or the gradient filter. So I'll click on Brush, and I will hold down the Option key or Alt on Windows to get the minus brush. Put that up there where you can see it. And I'll tap the right bracket key to make my brush a bit bigger. And now I'm just going to paint over that rock so it doesn't get too light. Now that's coming in a bit too dark for my taste, so I'm going to undo that. Command Z or Control Z. And then I'm going to lower the density of my brush here. So that's kind of like an opacity slider. And now when I hold down Option on Mac or Alt on Windows, I can darken it, and it's not going to darken it down quite as much. I can also lower the flow down and do the same kind of thing there. So there we go. Overall, that is working really well. Let's do the preview for the 2 radial adjustments that I added. So right now, this is just the adjustment created by the 2 gradient filters. And now with the radial filters, you can see we're focusing in a little bit more attention on the lens. Now, one thing I'm noticing here is that this edge of the background above this kind of chip on the upper right part of the lens is being affected. So let me get my brush tool and let me brush over that, make my brush smaller so that it is not really being affected. And if you want to see the overlay to see what you're doing, just press O on the keyboard or just tap it. You don't have to keep it pressed down. So now the overlay is turned on, and now I can come in here and paint that out so it's not being affecting the background area there above that part of the chip. So there we go. That looks pretty good. The rest of this doesn't really matter so much down in the shadow area. And you can see the area where I had subtracted from the rock there earlier. Just tap O again. There we go. That's looking a little bit better. All right, I'm going to click close there at the bottom of that radial filter panel. And then the last thing I want to explore is the adjustment brush. So up to this point, we've explored the regular gradual filter or the gradient filter that allows you to apply specific changes to the image based on a linear gradient. We've explored the radial filter, which allows you to do, the same thing essentially, but with a radial type shape, to which you can also control the edge feathering. The adjustment brush is going to allow you to paint on specific areas of the image in irregular shapes to add lightening or darkening, essentially dodging and burning. So I'll come up here to the adjustment brush icon up here, and we'll click on that to open up the controls. I'll just double click on the word effect to reset all my sliders. And what I want to do is I want to enhance the sunlight that is shining on the kind of fluted edges of the mountain in the background here. I really like the way that looks, but I want to just bring that out a little bit more. So I'm going to bring my exposure up. And one thing I just want to clarify here, whenever I set my sliders before I use a local tool, I really have no idea if the amount that I'm choosing is correct. It's just a starting amount so I can see something happening while I am applying the brush, and then I come back and I fine-tune it later. So this may be too much, it may be not enough, I don't know. We'll find out once I actually start putting it down. I'm going to make my brush size a bit bigger, and I'll come down here and check my density. In this case, I want my density to be up pretty high, and the flow can be up all the way, and I definitely do want the brush to be feathered. And so I'm just going to click here to put down a point, or a pin rather, and I'm just going to now start brushing over parts of the mountain, make my brush smaller. And, this is really where it becomes a lot like painting in a way, except, of course, I'm using the original image and what's happening in the original image kind of as a guide on where I might want to paint. And so I'm just sort of trying to highlight these fluted edges that already have, a fair amount of sunlight shining on them. And let me just turn the preview on and off here. So there's before and there's after. So overall, I like kind of accentuating that sunlight shining on the mountain. Other thing I'm going to do is maybe turn the clarity up and maybe bring my contrast up and maybe bring the blacks down. There we go. So the reason I'm turning the blacks down is I noticed that when I, brighten that area, I was, of course, brightening some of the shadows, based on where I had brushed. So rather than just kind of go back in and trying to subtract the shadows by holding down the Option key on Mac or the Alt key on Windows and painting with a subtract brush, I just felt it was easier to use one of the sliders over here and darken them down a bit. So there we go. That is looking a lot better. So let's do the before and then the after. yeah, overall, I really do like that a lot. Now, I could do a similar thing here if I wanted to, using the same brush pen of painting in maybe a little bit more on the top of this palm tree right here. Just to sort of, again, accentuate some of the highlight areas that are already on that. And that looks pretty good as well. Let's do the before and after. Yeah, that's coming through really nicely. So again, the whole point of local adjustments is to, you're kind of, I like to think of it as sculpting with light. You're using the light and dark values in the picture to draw attention to specific areas or enhance certain areas. You're guiding the viewer's eye. You're de-emphasizing other areas. And I'm going to do one other brush. So I'm going to click on New here at the brush panel to give myself a new brush. And this brush is going to be a darkening brush. And I'm going to just brush along the edge of this rock here. Now I am going to turn on Automask for this. So what Automask is going to do is it will sense the tonal value that I'm painting on and prevent the adjustment from spilling over into adjacent areas, as long as there's a clear, obvious edge. And of course, we do have a clear, obvious edge here in the form of this rock. So if I tap there, I can paint along the edge here of this, and even let's kind of darken this down a little bit. And again, the reason that I would choose to do an adjustment of this sort is because I want to put most of the attention on the lens and what's going on in there, rather than on the rocks that it's resting on here. So let me just tap O on the keyboard, and you can see that the Automask has done a pretty good job here of restricting the adjustment to just the rocks. If I hold down the space bar, I can click in the image to zoom in, and you can see how that is a pretty, nice fine edge there. And by the way, that is a very useful trick. When you have an adjustment tool active, you need to hold the space bar down and then click in the image to zoom in or out. Of course, normally you could just click in the image and it would zoom in or out, but when you have the adjustment tool, it's going to want to apply the adjustment. All right, so that looks pretty good. I'm going to do another adjustment here with the Radial Filter that I placed earlier. So I'll click on the Radial Filter. I want to be working with the one that is affecting the interior. So that's this one here. I want to change the color balance a little bit on the interior. So I'm going to make it a little bit bluer by just coming up to the temperature slider and making that a little bit bluer there. Again, just to suggest that there's something other going on when we're looking through that view there. All right, so overall, I think that looks pretty good. I'm going to do maybe one other thing here, which is more of a global adjustment. I'm going to come down to the split toning tab. I'm going to enter in a value here for about 38, 37, something like that for the highlights. And I'm going to turn the saturation up. And I'm going to do the same value here for the shadows. And I'll turn its saturation up. So this is just applying an overall kind of warming look to the image, kind of almost like a sepia tone applied to a color image, if you will. And that looks pretty good. And then, of course, I can come back to my Radial Filter. Again, I'll click on the one for the interior of the lens. And then I can further tweak that custom adjustment there that makes the interior of the lens bluer. Except one thing that I'm noticing here is that I do have this very kind of strong brownish tone here on the rock, which kind of is not meshing too well with the cooler tone on the top part of the rock. So I think what I'm going to do is come back to my adjustment brush, and I'm going to add a new adjustment brush here for the rock. And let me just double click on the exposure slider to reset that. And let me do a couple things. One is I'm going to maybe brush in a little bit more of a cooler tone, and maybe I'll also desaturate a bit. And we'll see what that looks like there. Yeah, there we go. That is just making that kind of transition edge that I saw before look a little bit better. So you can see here it was, this kind of obvious transition where it was partly brown, but then getting a little bit light or cooler up towards the top of the rock. But now that looks a lot better. So I like that. Very good. So a a little conceptual point here is that, dodging and burning type adjustments do not just have to do the basic dodging and burning, which of course is lightening and darkening. They can be used to apply all sorts of adjustments, such as, modifying color balance and saturation, as I just did here with this adjustment on the rock. All right, let's close that brush tool there. And let me tap Y on the keyboard so we can see the before and after view. So this is really not the before and after view that I was looking for, because what it's showing me is the way the image looked when I created the virtual copy. So I had already done some processing to it previously before I created the virtual copy. So that's why it's not kind of giving me the real before version. But it's good that it did that, because it suggests to me a really cool little trick I can share with you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open the history panel here and scroll down to the bottom to when I cropped the image. So I will right click on that most recent crop state, and I'll choose copy history step settings to before. And that is, as you can now see, going to make that my before state. So if I tap on the tab key to hide my side panel, we can now see larger versions of these, and we can see how that is working. So definitely looking a lot better than when we started, has a lot more character, and local adjustments have been a big part of creating that look. Of course, that is sort of just the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot more that could be done to work with the local adjustments in Lightroom to apply dodging and burning to certain parts of the image, or even to create, the look of artificial lighting in some cases. And there's a lot more custom stuff you can do with the adjustment brush tool that I haven't had time to get into, but we will take a look at some of those things in a future episode of TheFIX. And we will also take a look at kind of the companion topic here, dodging and burning in Photoshop, on a future episode of TheFIX, and not too far in the future either. I have it actually on the schedule for probably a couple weeks from now. Well, I hope that you found that interesting and useful information. It's just a peek into some of the many ways that you might use the local adjustment tools in Lightroom to enhance your photographs. And again, that even though I call it local adjustments, essentially it is just dodging and burning. But the great thing about the way they work in Lightroom is that, of course, you can apply many other adjustments beyond just basic lightening and darkening, dodging and burning, when you use them. And as I mentioned earlier, I will, of course, be coming back in a future episode of TheFIX, not too long into the future, and I'll be looking at dodging and burning in Photoshop. So stay tuned for that. And one final reminder, remember that you have until midnight Pacific Standard Time on Tuesday, April 19th to enter for the Rocky Nook book giveaway, where you can win a book of your choice from Rocky Nook. So to get all the details on that, head back to the episode page for episode 60, which was about layer mask basics in Photoshop. Of course, I'll put a link to that in the show notes. But you have a few more hours left to enter if you have not already done so. All right, well, that about wraps it up for this week's show. Remember, you can always check out the audio version of TheFIX on iTunes, or you can come here to the website, thisweekinphoto.com/TheFIX, for the video version. I'm Seán Duggan. Thanks very much for watching. Catch you next week.